Admiral Kate Morgan stood at the large window of Earth Station Alpha, looking out at the stars. She had been in space for 20 years, but today felt different. Today, everything changed. The communication room was full of people. Scientists, military officers, and politicians all crowded around the main screen. They had been waiting for 3 hours since the strange signal arrived. No one knew what to expect. Dr. Alan Brooks sat at his computer, typing fast. He was Earth's best expert on alien life, though until today, he had never actually met any aliens. His hands shook a little as he worked on translating the message that came from deep space. "I think I have it," Alan said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. Kate walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. "What does it say?" she asked. Alan cleared his throat and read from his screen. "To the species of the third planet. You will surrender to the Zephyrian Empire within 30 of your days. If you do not surrender, we will destroy your world and everyone on it. This is not a request. This is an order." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then everyone started talking at once. Some people shouted. Others asked questions. A few just sat down and put their heads in their hands. President Jack Coleman's voice came through the speakers from Earth. "Admiral Morgan, are you there?" "Yes, Mr. President," Kate replied. "We all heard the message." "How many ships do they have?" the President asked. Captain Lisa Park stepped forward. She was in charge of Earth's small fleet of military ships. "We don't know yet, sir. But if they can send messages across space like this, they probably have technology we can't match." Kate nodded. Lisa was right. Earth had 12 military ships and a few space stations. It wasn't much compared to what an empire might have. Dr. Alan Brooks was still working at his computer. He found something strange about the alien language. The words were arranged in a very specific way. Everything was about order and control. There were no words for art or music or fun. It was like the aliens only cared about giving orders and following them. "Kate," Alan said, "I think these aliens are very different from us. Their language shows they think in straight lines. Everything has to be organized and controlled. I don't think they understand creativity or freedom." Kate thought about this. "What do you mean?" "Well," Alan explained, "look at how they gave us the ultimatum. They expect us to either give up right away or fight them with weapons. They probably think those are the only two choices any species would make." Captain Lisa Park was already making plans for Earth's defense. She knew it would be hopeless, but she had to try. "I can get our ships ready for battle," she said. "Maybe. We can hurt them enough to make them think twice." "How long would we last?" Kate asked. Lisa looked sad. "Maybe a few hours. If we're lucky." President Coleman's voice came through the speakers again. "I'm calling an emergency meeting with all world leaders. We need to decide what to do. Admiral Morgan, I want you and your team to keep studying that message. Find out everything you can about these aliens." After the president stopped talking, the room got quiet again. Everyone knew they were in big trouble. Earth's weapons were like throwing rocks at a tank compared to what the aliens probably had. But Kate noticed something. Dr. Alan Brooks was still working, and he looked excited about something. "Alan, what are you thinking?" she asked. He looked up with bright eyes. "I'm thinking about what makes humans special. These aliens seem to think there are only two ways to respond to threats: give up or fight. But what if there's a third way?" "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. Alan stood up and walked to the big screen. "What if we do something they don't expect? Something they can't understand because their minds don't work like ours?" Kate was interested now. "Go on. Their language shows they've conquered lots of other species," Alan continued. But I bet all those species responded the same way. They either surrendered right away or tried to fight and lost. What if we do something completely different? President Coleman came back on the speakers. Admiral Morgan, I've made a decision. I'm authorizing something called Project Mirror Shield. Dr. Brooks, I need you to work with Maria Santos in communications. Captain Park, get our ships ready, but don't attack unless I give the order. What's Project Mirror Shield? Kate asked. Something that might save us all, the president replied. Or it might be the craziest thing we've ever tried. Alan, your idea about doing something unexpected gave me a thought. What if the best weapon we have isn't a weapon at all? Kate felt confused, but also hopeful. Maybe there was a way out of this that didn't involve everyone dying. Maria Santos arrived at the station 6 hours later. She was Earth's best communications expert. She could send messages across space faster and clearer than anyone else. Mr. President, Maria said over the communication link, I brought all the equipment you asked for. But I still don't understand what we're doing. You will soon, President Coleman replied. Dr. Brooks, explain to Maria what you found about the alien language. As Alan talked to Maria about how the aliens thought, Kate looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, alien ships were probably heading toward Earth. In 30 days, they would arrive expecting Earth to surrender or fight. But maybe, just maybe, humans would surprise them with a third choice that no one had ever tried before. Maria Santos had never worked so hard in her life. For 3 days straight, she barely slept or ate. Her job was to send human culture into space, and she was doing it in a way no one had ever tried before. The communication center looked like chaos. Hundreds of computers were running at the same time. People were scanning books, uploading music, and converting movies into signals that could travel across the galaxy. Maria walked between the machines, making sure everything worked perfectly. How's it going? Dr. Alan Brooks asked as he entered the room. Better than I hoped, Maria replied, wiping sweat from her face. We've already sent the complete works of Shakespeare, all of Batch's music, and about 10,000 songs from different countries. The signal is so strong that anyone with a radio in 3 solar systems can hear it. Alan smiled. The president's plan is working. Instead of preparing for war, we're showing the universe who we really are. Meanwhile, Dr. Ben Miller was studying everything they knew about the Zephyrian Empire. Ben was a psychologist who usually helped people with their problems. Now he was trying to understand the minds of aliens who wanted to destroy Earth. Ben had been reading reports about other species the Zephyrians had conquered. The pattern was always the same. The aliens would give an ultimatum. The species would either surrender immediately or try to fight back with weapons. When they fought, they always lost quickly. When they surrendered, they became slaves. They expect us to be predictable, Ben told Kate Morgan during a video call. Every species they've met has acted the same way. That's why they think they can't lose. But we're not acting the same way, Kate replied. Exactly. We're doing something that probably never occurred to them. We're not preparing weapons or building defenses. We're sharing our culture with the entire galaxy. Captain Steve Adams was having his own adventure. He commanded a small research ship called the Horizon. President Coleman had given him a secret mission to visit worlds that the Zephyrians had already conquered. Steve's first stop was a planet called Kepler 442b. The aliens there looked like tall, thin people with blue skin. They had been conquered by the Zephyrians 50 years ago and now worked as farmers for the Empire. When Steve landed his ship, the blue aliens were very surprised. They had never seen a human before. "Why are you here?" asked one of the aliens. His name was something like Kethra, but Steve couldn't pronounce it right. "We're trying to understand the Zephyrians," Steve explained. Our planet got the same ultimatum you probably got 50 years ago. Kethra looked sad. Then your people will soon be slaves like us. The Zephyrians are too strong to fight. But we're not fighting them, Steve said. We're doing something else. Here, let me show you. Steve played some human music from his ship's speakers. It was a simple song called Amazing Grace, sung by a woman with a beautiful voice. The blue aliens stopped their work and listened. Some of them had tears in their eyes. What is this? Kethra asked. It's music, art, something we create just because it makes us feel good. Steve explained. The blue aliens had never heard anything like it. Under Zephyrian rule, they only worked and followed orders. They had forgotten what it felt like to create something beautiful. Back on Earth, the cultural broadcast was having effects no one expected. Maria Santos started getting messages from across the galaxy. Some came from the conquered species that Steve was visiting. Others came from places they didn't even know existed. Admiral Morgan, Maria called excitedly. You need to see this. Kate hurried over to Maria's station. On the screen was a message in broken English. Human friends, the message said. We are the people of Altair 4. Zephyrians make us work in mines for 40 years. We hear your music. We hear your stories. Please send more. We remember now what it feels like to dream. More messages kept coming. Species that had been enslaved for decades were waking up to ideas they had forgotten. The concept of freedom. The joy of creating. Art. The power of thinking for themselves. Dr. Ben Miller was amazed when he saw the reports. This is incredible, he told the team. We're not just broadcasting our culture. We're starting a revolution. What kind of revolution? Kate asked. A revolution of ideas. These species haven't rebelled against the Zephyrians because they forgot how to think independently. But our music and art are reminding them who they used to be. President Coleman called an emergency meeting. All the team leaders gathered around the main screen to hear what he had to say. People, what we're doing is working better than I dared to hope, the president began. But we need to be careful. The Zephyrians will notice that their empire is changing. They might decide to attack us early. Captain Lisa Park had been monitoring space for any signs of the alien fleet. Mr. President, we're picking up increased radio traffic from Zephyrian space. They seem to be having problems with their conquered worlds. What kind of problems? Kate asked. Production delays. Missed quotas. Some kind of civil unrest, but not the kind they're used to dealing with. Dr. Alan Brooks was still working on understanding the Zephyrian language. He had made an important discovery. Mr. President, Alan said, I've been studying more of their communications. The Zephyrians have a very rigid social structure. Everyone has a specific role, and no one ever questions it. But our cultural broadcasts are teaching their slaves to question everything. Maria Santos raised her hand. Sir, should we keep broadcasting? We're using a lot of power, and some people are worried we're making the aliens angry. President Coleman thought for a moment. Keep broadcasting. Double the power if you have to. If we're making them angry, it means we're winning. Captain Steve Adams reported in from another conquered world. This time he was visiting a species that looked like giant insects. They had been conquered by the Zephyrians over 100 years ago. The same thing is happening here, Steve reported. These people are starting to remember what it was like before the Zephyrians came. They're asking me about human concepts like democracy and individual rights. Are they planning to rebel? Kate asked. Not with weapons, Steve replied. But they're talking about work slowdowns and peaceful protests. Things the Zephyrians have never had to deal with before. As the days passed, the effects of the human cultural broadcasts spread further across the galaxy. Species that had been conquered and enslaved for centuries were remembering what freedom felt like. They weren't starting violent rebellions. Instead, they were doing something much more dangerous to the Zephyrian Empire. They were thinking for themselves. Dr. Ben Miller summarized what was happening in his daily report to President Coleman. Sir, we've essentially weaponized human creativity. Every song we broadcast, every story we tell, every piece of art we share is teaching the conquered species that there's more to life than following orders. The Zephyrian Empire is built on absolute obedience. If that breaks down, their whole system collapses. With 20 days left before the ultimatum expired, Earth continued its unprecedented strategy. Instead of building weapons or preparing for battle, humanity was fighting a war with ideas. And for the first time in galactic history, those ideas were winning. War Commander Vex Ver had ruled the Zephyrian Empire's military for over 200 years. In all that time, he had never seen anything like what was happening now. His perfectly organized empire was falling apart, and he didn't understand. The trouble started on Kepler 442b, the agricultural world where blue-skinned aliens grew food for the Empire. The workers had always been quiet and obedient. They worked from sunrise to sunset without complaining. But now something was wrong. Vex Ver. Read the report from the planet's overseer with growing anger. The workers were still doing their jobs, but they were also doing something else. They were making art. Art? Vexver said to himself. What is art? The Zephyrian language had no word for art. They had words for useful work and waste of time, but nothing in between. Yet somehow, the blue aliens were spending their free time creating beautiful things that served no practical purpose. Even worse, they were singing while they worked. The overseer reported that production was actually going up, but the workers seemed happy. Happiness was not something the Zephyrians understood either. Commander Ruth Hayes was having the best month of her career. As Earth's intelligence chief, her job was to gather information about threats to humanity. But now she was doing something much more interesting. She was helping coordinate a galactic revolution. Messages were pouring in from conquered worlds across Zephyrian space. Species that hadn't spoken to each other in decades were now sharing human music and stories. They were also sharing something else. Hope. Admiral Morgan, Ruth called from her desk. You need to see this latest report. Kate walked over and read the message on Ruth's screen. It was from a mining colony in the Vega system. Human friends, the message said. We are rock eaters of Vega 3. Zephyrians make us dig metal for 100 years. Yesterday, we heard human song called We Shall Overcome. Today, 50 workers sang together in mineshaft. Overseer very confused. Cannot stop singing because singing not forbidden by Empire law. Please send more songs about freedom. Kate smiled. They're learning to find loopholes in the Empire's rules. It gets better, Ruth replied. Look at this one from the textile workers on Arcturus 2. The second message was even more encouraging. The textile workers had started weaving human art patterns into the fabric they made for the Empire. Since the patterns were still functional, the overseers couldn't stop them. But now every Zephyrian uniform had tiny symbols of freedom hidden. In the weave. Dr. Amy Clark was working 18 hours a day, but she loved every minute of it. As a cultural anthropologist, her job was to study how different societies worked. Now she was helping to change societies across the galaxy. Amy had teams working on customizing human culture for each alien species. What inspired the blue farmers might not work for the rock-eating miners. Each species needed examples that spoke to their particular hearts and minds. We just finished the adaptation for the Centauri crystal growers, Amy reported to President Coleman during their daily briefing. They communicate through color patterns, so we converted human poetry into light shows. Early reports say they're creating the most beautiful crystals in Empire history. Are the Zephyrians noticing? The president asked. Oh, yes, Amy replied with a grin. They're very confused. Their productivity reports show that most worlds are actually working better than before. But they're also getting reports about unusual behavior that doesn't fit any of their categories for rebellion. Captain Steve Adams was visiting his fifth conquered world, and the pattern was the same everywhere. The alien species were remembering what it felt like to be free. They weren't planning violent rebellions, but they were doing something the Zephyrians had never prepared for. They were becoming individuals. On the ocean world of Tau Ceti 4, the fish-like aliens had started creating underwater sculptures. On the desert planet of Wolf 359b, the reptilian species were writing poetry. In the sand. Everywhere Steve went, he found the same thing. People waking up to the idea that life could be more than just following orders. Captain Adams to Earth Control, Steve reported. I'm seeing something amazing here on Proxima 3. The local species has started what they call green circles. Groups of workers get together after their shifts and share stories about what they want their lives to be like. It's like they're planning for a future where they're free. Back on Earth, Maria Santos was expanding the cultural broadcast system. They were now transmitting human culture 24 hours a day on hundreds of different frequencies. Music, stories, art, philosophy, and even simple things like recipes and jokes were streaming across the galaxy. We're getting requests now, Maria told Kate during one of their meetings. The conquered species aren't just listening anymore. They're asking for specific things. The crystal growers want to know about human holidays. The desert people want to learn about human poetry. Everyone wants to know about something called democracy. Dr. Ben Miller was tracking the psychological effects of the broadcasts, and what he found amazed him. The conquered species weren't just learning about human culture. They were remembering their own cultures that had been suppressed by the Empire. It's like we gave them permission to be themselves again, Ben explained to the team. The Zephyrians never actually destroyed their cultures. They just convinced them to forget about them. Our broadcasts are helping them remember who they used to be. War Commander Thexfer was getting more frustrated every day. His reports showed that Empire productivity was down by 15% across 12 star systems. But when he asked for explanations, his overseers gave him answers that made no sense. The workers are distracted by noise, one overseer reported. What kind of noise? Thexfer demanded. They call it music, sir. I do not understand the concept. Another overseer reported. The slaves are wasting time on useless activities. What? Activities? They make objects that serve no function. They call it art. They also gather in groups to share stories. These activities seem to make them happy, which interferes with their work. Thexfer studied the word happy in his computer. According to the database, it meant a state of emotional satisfaction that reduces efficiency. Why would anyone want to be happy? The most disturbing report came from his homeworld. Some young Zephyrians had somehow gotten access to the human broadcasts. They were asking dangerous questions about why their society was organized the way it was. A few had even been caught trying to create music of their own. This cannot continue, Thexfer declared to his staff. Find the source of these transmissions and stop them. Sir, his communications officer replied, the transmissions are coming from the planet Earth, the same planet we gave the surrender ultimatum. Thexfer was confused. Are they trying to negotiate? No, sir. They appear to be ... sharing their culture with the galaxy. This made no sense to Thexfer. When faced with conquest, species either surrendered or fought. They didn't broadcast noise and useless activities across space. What were these humans trying to accomplish? Commander Ruth Hayes intercepted Zephyrian military communications that showed how confused they were becoming. The Empire had protocols for dealing with rebellion, but no protocols for dealing with conquered species who suddenly started thinking for themselves while still doing their jobs. "They're trying to figure out what we're doing," Ruth reported to the team. "But their thinking is so rigid that they can't understand concepts like creativity or freedom. It's like trying to explain color to someone who's born blind." Dr. Amy Clark noticed something else in the reports from conquered worlds. The different species were starting to communicate with each other. For the first time in centuries, aliens who had been separated by the Empire were sharing ideas and supporting each other. "We've created something beautiful," Amy told President Coleman. "We've given the galaxy a common language of freedom and creativity. Species that couldn't talk to each other before are now working together." With 15 days left before the ultimatum expired, the Zephyrian Empire was experiencing its first real crisis in over 500 years. Not a military crisis or an economic crisis, but something much more dangerous, a crisis of ideas. The conquered species were still following Empire laws, but they were also doing something else. They were remembering what it meant to be alive, instead of just existing. And once that memory awakened, there was no putting it back to sleep. The Zephyrian Empire was 3,000 years old. It had conquered over 200 different species across 50 star systems. It had never faced a crisis like this one. War Commander Thexfar stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no sense. Productivity was down across the Empire. Supply chains were breaking. Most disturbing of all, some Zephyrian citizens were starting to ask questions that had never been asked before. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "we have a problem on the homeworld." "What kind of problem?" Thexfar demanded. "Some of our young people have been creating noise patterns. They call it music. When we tried to stop them, they asked why it was forbidden. We couldn't give them an answer because it's not actually against any laws." Thexfar felt something he had never experienced before: confusion. The Empire had laws about useful work and efficient production, but they had never needed laws about music because no Zephyrian had ever wanted to make music before. General Paul White was having the most interesting assignment of his career. President Coleman had sent him to meet with leaders from the conquered worlds, but these weren't military meetings. They were planning sessions for something entirely new. Paul's first meeting was with representatives from 12 different species. They met on a small moon that was technically neutral territory. The aliens looked very different from each other, but they all had the same look in their eyes: hope. "General White," said Kethra, the blue-skinned farmer from Kepler 442b, "we don't want weapons from your people. We want something more powerful." "What's that?" Paul asked. "We want more examples of what free people can create," said another alien, who looked like a giant butterfly. "Your music and stories have awakened something in us. We want to learn how to make our own." Paul smiled. "That's not something I can give you. That's something you have to find inside yourselves." "But how?" asked the third alien, whose skin looked like living crystal. "The same way humans did," Paul replied. "One person at a time, one song at a time, one story at a time. Freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create." The meeting lasted for 6 hours. The alien representatives didn't want military support or weapons. They wanted libraries and art galleries and music schools. They wanted to learn how to build societies where people could think and create and dream. Captain Tony Lewis was monitoring Zephyrian military communications, and what he heard worried him. The Empire was starting to panic. Admiral Morgan, Tony, reported, "The Zephyrian fleet is having serious problems. 3 ship captains have been arrested for asking unauthorized questions. 2 more ships have reported crew members trying to create art in their spare time." Kate was amazed. "The broadcasts are reaching even their military? It gets worse for them," Tony continued. "Or better for us, depending on how you look at it." Some Zephyrian officers are starting to question why they're attacking Earth. They're asking what makes humans so dangerous that they need to be destroyed. Dr. Ben Mueller had been studying reports from across Zephyrian space, and he was seeing patterns that excited him. The Empire's response to the cultural awakening was making things worse for them, not better. They're doing exactly what we hoped they would do, Ben explained to the team. They're trying to crack down harder on behavior they don't understand. But that's just making their people ask more questions. What kind of questions? Kate asked. Questions like, why can't we make music? And why is art forbidden? And why don't we have choices about our lives? The Zephyrians have no good answers, because their whole system is based on never asking those questions in the first place. Commander Nancy Scott was coordinating with resistance movements across the galaxy, but these weren't normal resistance movements. Nobody was planning to blow up buildings or attack soldiers. Instead, they were planning something much more subversive. It's genius, Nancy explained to President Coleman. They're planning massive cultural events. Art shows, music festivals, poetry readings. All perfectly legal under Empire law, because the Empire never thought to make creativity illegal. When are these events supposed to happen? The President asked. That's the beautiful part. They're all scheduled for the exact moment our ultimatum expires. While the Zephyrian fleet is expecting us to either surrender or fight their own people. We'll be celebrating freedom and creativity across dozens of worlds. Meanwhile, Captain Steve Adams was visiting more conquered worlds and finding the same thing everywhere. People who were remembering how to be free. But he also found something that worried him. Earth Control, this is Captain Adams, he reported from his ship. I'm seeing increased Zephyrian military presence on all the worlds I've visited. They're bringing in more soldiers and overseers. Are the locals scared? Kate asked. No, that's what's strange. If anything, they seem more determined. One of them told me, we lived without hope for so long that we forgot what it felt like. Now that we remember, we'd rather die than forget again. Dr. Amy Clark was working with teams across Earth to prepare for what they were calling Cultural Event Horizon, the moment when everything would change. They were preparing a special broadcast that would go out the moment the ultimatum expired. It's not just human culture this time, Amy explained to the team. We're combining human creativity with art and music from all the species we've been in contact with. It's going to be a celebration of what the galaxy can create when people are free to think for themselves. War Commander Thexfer was losing control of his empire, and he knew it. Reports were coming in of cultural contamination on 47 different worlds. Production quotas were being missed. Workers were spending time on non-essential activities. Most disturbing of all, some of his own officers were starting to question their orders. Sir, his second-in-command reported, the Council is demanding action. They want to know why a single planet of primitives is causing so much trouble. They're not fighting us, Thexfer replied, still confused. They're doing something else. Something we don't understand. What are your orders, sir? Thexfer looked at the star charts showing Earth's location. In 10 days, his fleet would arrive there. The humans would either surrender or be destroyed. That was how it had always worked, but nothing about this situation was working the way it always had. Prepare the fleet, he finally said. We leave for Earth tomorrow. Back on Earth, President Coleman called a final strategy meeting. Representatives from around the world gathered to hear his plan for the next 10 days. People, the president began, we've accomplished something impossible. We've started a peaceful revolution across the Zephyrian Empire using nothing but our culture and creativity. But now comes the real test. What do you mean? Asked Dr. Alan Brooks. The Zephyrian fleet is coming. In 10 days, they'll be here expecting us to either surrender or fight. We're going to surprise them with a third option. Which is? Kate asked. President Coleman smiled. We're going to invite them to the biggest cultural celebration in galactic history. Every conquered world, every species that's remembered what freedom feels like, every person who's learned to create instead of just follow orders, they're all going to be part of something beautiful. Maria Sandus raised her hand. Mr. President, what if the Zephyrians decide to attack anyway? Then we'll face that when it happens, the president replied. But I have a feeling that by the time they get here, the Zephyrian Empire won't be the same empire that gave us the ultimatum 30 days ago. As the meeting ended, everyone felt the same mixture of excitement and nervousness. In 10 days, they would find out if humanity's greatest gamble in history would pay off. They had bet everything on the idea that creativity and freedom were more powerful than weapons and fear. The galaxy was about to find out if they were right. The Zephyrian War fleet arrived at Earth exactly 30 days after getting the ultimatum. War Commander Dexfer expected to find either a surrendering planet or one preparing for a hopeless battle. Instead, he found something that broke his understanding of how the universe worked. Earth was broadcasting the largest cultural celebration in galactic history. Sir, his communications officer reported with confusion in his voice. We're receiving transmissions from the human planet, but they're not surrender terms or battle plans. They're inviting us to join their celebration. Dexfer stared, his screens in disbelief. Instead of military formations, Earth's space was filled with ships from dozens of different species. But they weren't warships. They were vessels carrying artists, musicians, poets, and storytellers from across his own empire. How is this possible? He demanded. Admiral Kate Morgan's voice came over the communication system, calm and welcoming. War Commander Dexfer, I'm Admiral Morgan of Earth Defense Command. We've been expecting you. You will surrender immediately. Dexfer responded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. Actually, Kate replied, we have a different proposal. We'd like to show you something that's never existed in the galaxy before. Would you be willing to receive a cultural transmission? Dexfer was about to refuse when his aide whispered urgently in his ear, Sir, we're getting reports from across the Empire. The situation is unprecedented. Before Dexfer could respond, his main screen filled with the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. It was a collaborative artwork created by every species in his empire, working together for the first time in centuries. The blue farmers of Kepler 442b had grown crops in patterns that formed pictures when seen from space. The crystal growers of Centauri had created light sculptures that sparkled across their entire planet. The ocean dwellers of Tau Ceti were singing songs that harmonized with music being played by the desert people of Wolf 359b. But most shocking of all, some of the images showed young Zephyrians creating art alongside the conquered species. What have you done? Dexfer whispered. Dr. Alan Brooks' voice joined the transmission. We've reminded the galaxy what it feels like to be free. Your empire was built on the idea that there are only two responses to power, submit or fight. But we've shown everyone a third option, create. Captain Lisa Park reported to Kate from Earth's Defense Center. Admiral, we're detecting massive power fluctuations in the Zephyrian fleet. It looks like some of their ships are having internal problems. Kate wasn't surprised. Captain Tony Lewis had been monitoring Zephyrian communications for days. The Empire's military was falling apart from within as more and more officers began questioning their orders. War Commander, Kate said gently, your own people are asking questions you can't answer. Why are you here to destroy a planet that's brought joy to your empire? What threat do artists and musicians pose to your military? Dexfer looked around. His command center. Half of his officers were staring at the cultural celebration on their screens instead of monitoring their weapons. Some were even humming along with the music. "This is not how war works," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "You're right," came a new voice over the communications. It was President Coleman. "This isn't war at all. This is evolution. For 3,000 years, your empire has spread across the galaxy by conquest. But we're offering something different. We're offering growth through cooperation and creation." Reports were flooding in from across Zephyrian space. On 47 different worlds, conquered species were holding simultaneous celebrations of freedom and creativity. They weren't rebelling against the Empire's laws. They were simply living beyond those laws, in spaces the Empire had never thought to regulate. Commander Ruth Hayes coordinated with resistance leaders across the galaxy as they put the final touches on their celebration. "This is it," she told. "Kate, every conquered world is ready. When you give the signal, they'll all begin the largest cultural event in galactic history." General Paul White was on the neutral moon, watching as representatives from dozens of species worked together to create a declaration of freedom. It wasn't a military document or a political treaty. It was a poem written in 50 different languages, expressing the universal desire to create and choose and dream. "Admiral Morgan," Paul reported, "the representatives are ready to transmit their declaration. It's beautiful. It talks about the right of every thinking being to make art, to ask questions, and to imagine a better future." Dr. Amy Clark was amazed by what she was seeing on her cultural monitoring systems. "Kate, you need to see this. The celebration isn't just happening on conquered worlds anymore. We're getting reports of Zephyrian citizens joining in. Young Zephyrians are creating art and asking questions about freedom." War Commander Vexver was losing control of his own fleet. 3 ship captains had refused orders to prepare weapons. 2 more had requested permission to join the celebration. His communications officer was openly crying while listening to a song created by children from 12 different species. "Sir," his second-in-command said quietly, "what are your orders?" Vexver looked at his fleet, then at the celebration surrounding Earth, then at the reports from his crumbling empire. For the first time in his 200-year military career, he didn't know what to do. "They've defeated us," he said finally. "Sir?" "They've defeated us without firing a shot. They've taken our empire apart, using nothing but songs and stories and art." Vexver paused. "How do you fight an enemy that makes your own people happier than they've ever been?" Maria Santos began the final phase of Earth's cultural broadcast. This wasn't just human culture anymore. It was a celebration of what every species in the galaxy could create when they were free to think and dream and imagine. The broadcast reached every corner of Zephyrian space simultaneously. On conquered worlds, in space stations, on military ships, and even on the Zephyrian homeworld, people heard the same message. You are free to create, free to choose, and free to be more than what others expect you to be. Admiral Kate Morgan made the final transmission to War Commander Vexver. "Commander, we're not asking for your surrender. We're offering you a choice. You can try to destroy us and spend the rest of your life fighting an empire that's already changed beyond recognition. Or you can join us in building something new." Vexver looked around his command center one more time. His officers were no longer watching their military displays. They were watching the celebration and listening to music, and some were even trying to draw pictures on their data tablets. What would this new thing be? He asked. A galaxy where every species can contribute their unique gifts, where military strength is used to protect creativity instead of suppressing it, where the goal isn't conquest, but cooperation. Captain Steve Adams reported from his ship near the Zephyrian fleet. "Admiral, 3 more Zephyrian vessels have powered down their weapons. Their crews are requesting permission to join the celebration." Dr. Ben Miller was watching the psychological transformation happening across the galaxy in real time. "This is unprecedented," he told the team. "We're seeing the collapse of an authoritarian system, not through violence, but through the simple act of showing people there's a better way to live." War Commander Thexver made his decision. "All ships, power down weapons," he ordered. "We're going to join the celebration." His communications officer looked shocked. "Sir, are you sure?" "I've never been sure of anything in my life," Thexver replied. "But I know I can't destroy something that's made more people happy in 30 days than our empire has in 3,000 years. 5 hours later, Zephyrian and human ships were flying side by side, broadcasting messages of cooperation and creativity across the galaxy. The war that everyone expected never happened. Instead, the galaxy witnessed the birth of something entirely new, an alliance based on shared dreams instead of shared fears. Coleman addressed the galaxy from Earth. "Today marks the beginning of a new era, not an era of human dominance or Zephyrian rule, but an era where every species can contribute to our collective future. We've learned that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a gun or a bomb. It's an idea whose time has come." War Commander Thexver, now calling himself simply Thex, became the first Zephyrian ambassador to Earth. His first official act was to establish cultural exchange programs between Earth and every world in the former empire. "I spent 200 years conquering the galaxy," he said during his first diplomatic speech. "Now I want to spend the rest of my life helping it create beautiful things." The galaxy had been transformed not by superior firepower or clever strategy, but by the simple human belief that everyone deserves the freedom to dream. Humanity had won a war before the first shot was fired by proving that ideas are more powerful than weapons, and hope is stronger than fear. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't defeating an enemy. It was turning an enemy into a friend by showing them a better way to live.